So what is the actual truth in how your mindset affects your everyday life? Well, as you're probably aware, your brain keeps a running account on what is happening to you, what exactly that means to you, and what you should do because of it. In other words, it is constantly monitoring and interpreting your environment. These interpretations depend on a number of complex psychological structures like your personality or your personal interpretations of the world, but on the ground of all of these structures lies one important first question. Do you have a fixed mindset or do you have a growth mindset? But why does this simple question have such a massive impact on your personal psychology? The core of the fixed mindset is the belief that abilities are set in stone and therefore cannot change. This sounds like a pretty harmless and somewhat reasonable assumption at first glance, but let me show you how it affected myself growing up. When I started to write bad grades in math at school, while a friend of mine effortlessly aced every exam, I simply assumed that I was not mathematically gifted, and that was that. That basic belief then went on and got transferred to many different domains of my personal life. I probably sucked at art class because I wasn't a very creative person, and I was probably decent at sports because I was 6 foot tall and grew up in a sporty family. Now, what sound like some harmless interpretations of everyday situations were actually originating from my inherent fixed mindset, which completely robbed me of my ability to cope with failure. That's because if abilities like my math skill or creativity are set in stone, a test of those abilities would be an absolute judge of my abilities in that domain and maybe even have implications beyond that, like how smart I was. After all, if I would really be smart, I would be able to ace my math exams effortlessly like my friend did. This personal tale of my fixed mindset youth is actually well reflected in a lot of people in different domains of life. So let's take a closer look at the growth mindset as a way out of this. The core of the growth mindset is the belief that abilities are like muscles and that they can grow if you use them often enough. Again, the tricky part about mindsets is that their definitions almost sound a little bit too simplistic to be useful, but believe me, the implications that come from those simple assumptions are completely life-changing. My fixed mindset in arts class, for example, led me to avoid any kind of creative work or hobby for all my life simply because I thought my creative abilities are set in stone. If I hadn't overcome this mindset, it would have been completely impossible to start this YouTube channel, for example, which in many ways required me to adopt a growth mindset. That's because before starting this channel, I didn't know anything about lighting a video, basic design skills for my studio, video editing, script writing, and tons of more little skills tied to creativity. Without the inherent belief that my ability in these tasks can grow when I put in effort, it would have been impossible to start a channel in the first place. And the growth mindset does not only change the belief that abilities can grow, it also enables this ability on a neurological level. This has been observed in an experiment where fixed and growth-minded people were both asked difficult questions while observing their brain activity. The brain of fixed mindset people was most active when the researchers revealed whether they answered the question right or wrong. It shut down when they were presented information that enabled them to correct themselves if they learned that the answer was wrong. Their brains were attuned to judgment. The brain of growth-minded people, however, was turned to development and therefore most active when researchers explained why they were wrong. However, as we all know, the key element in the process of development is the willingness to put in effort. So let's examine how the two different mindsets can affect people's inclination to do so. By now, it shouldn't be a surprise to you that people with a fixed mindset are way less likely to exert effort for succeeding in a difficult task. This has been demonstrated by Carol Dweck in an experiment where she paired kids with different mindsets in 2 different groups and asked them to solve puzzles. After solving a puzzle, they could either increase the difficulty or solve the same puzzle again. And while kids with the fixed mindset solved the same puzzles over and over again, kids with the growth mindset were constantly increasing the difficulties and even asked if they could take some of the most difficult puzzles with them to practice a little bit more at home. According to Dweck, they understood that the puzzles weren't an indicator of how smart they were inherently, but were an opportunity to increase their abilities. When she asked the kids with a fixed mindset why they wouldn't increase the difficulty, they said stuff like, smart kids aren't supposed to need effort to solve tasks. And while nobody would actually agree to a statement like this up front, it is still deeply ingrained in today's culture. People today like to think of geniuses like Thomas Edison, for example, as a loner sitting in his lab where he would suddenly have a stroke of genius that led him to invent the light bulb. All genius, no effort. In reality, however, Thomas Edison worked in a well-funded laboratory with over 30 scientifically trained assistants, all of which worked day and night. And as you can see when you actually read Mindset, there are many examples like these in pop culture where people are celebrated as born geniuses, while the reality was completely different. This of course pushes people into a fixed mindset where they are actively afraid to exert effort, because if they do and still fail, it is a devastating judgment judgment to their ability. Therefore, they just avoid exerting the effort altogether, which of course allows them to avoid the judgment as well. That still leaves them in a tough spot when they do inevitably fail at something, because they have to assign the blame to someone or something other than themselves. This proclivity to assign blame elsewhere is visible in many areas of society today. For example, it is generally proven that black students who have to state their race before a test do worse because of all the negative stereotypes associated with that label. Dweck, however, found out that students with a fixed mindset were way more likely to be affected by those labels and then use them afterwards to cope with their failure. This became apparent in a study where African American students with a fixed mindset completely rejected the criticisms of their essays that came from a wild old Ivy League professor because he was just seen as a representative of the right establishment. Students with the growth mindset still described the professor as a dinosaur, but they acknowledged that he was a dinosaur who could teach them something. In contrast, they had no need to assign blame for their mistakes elsewhere, because these failures were no judgment of their abilities, but an opportunity to learn. Of course, nobody would want to make the point that talent doesn't exist and it all comes down to how much effort you put into things, but in reality you oftentimes have to exert tremendous amounts of effort before your talent can even show. Additionally, it is way more likely that someone's true abilities are held back by their mindset than by their inherent abilities. This has been shown by a beautiful story of a teacher named Jamie Escalante, who brought one of the worst schools in LA to the top of the national charts in advanced calculus. While every other teacher believed that these students were just inherently unable to excel because only the worst students were going to the Garfield High School, Jamie Escalante rejected that fixed mindset and proved them otherwise.
Students will rise to the level of expectation, Senor Molina.
Now that we established the importance of changing mindsets, let's take a look at how this change translates to everyday life and then talk about the 4 simple steps you can take to actually change it. Right before we do that though, I would really appreciate if you could take a second to like and subscribe, as it really is the most important thing for small YouTubers like me. We talked a lot about the psychological and scientific background of changing mindsets, so now let's see how all of this translates into areas like sports, business and leadership. And we should really start with sports, because no other area of life reflects the idea of the natural talent more strongly. The natural talent is someone like Billy Beane, who was the highest scorer in his basketball team, the quarterback in his football team, and the best hitter in the baseball team.
Very rare do you come upon a young man like Billy, who can run, who can field, who can throw, who can hit, and who can hit with power.
All of this natural talent, however, left him without the most important ability of all, the ability to fail. His natural talent pressured him into perfection in every game he played until he couldn't take it anymore and ended his by then very successful career in baseball. He learned his lesson though and made it his life work to prove that mindset is more important than talent. And he did that by specifically scouting people by their ability to cope with failure. This approach led his team, the Oakland Athletics, to 103 victories in the 2002 baseball season, with the second lowest payroll in baseball ever. And another legend who understood the importance of mindset, who you are maybe more familiar with, was Michael Jordan. Let's look at one of his most famous commercials for Nike.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
Michael Jordan knew that failure was part of the process, and he took charge of the process that created success out of failure, which is why he never got worse with age. So if mindset is the key to success in sports, how can we apply it in business and leadership? Author Jim Collins asked himself the same question and researched the biographies of several different CEOs, where he found one distinctive difference. The biographies of growth mindset CEOs contained intense discussions about employee development, while fixed mindset CEOs were mostly focused on themselves. They operated under what Collins called the "a genius with 1,000 helpers" model, which means that they simply used their employees to boost their own reputation for personal greatness. Fixed mindset CEOs didn't seem to want great teams either, because a great team could challenge their leaders' ideas. So while growth-minded leaders like Winston Churchill set up extra teams just to criticize their ideas, fixed-minded leaders just used them to display their own superiority. And while one person obviously doesn't make a whole company, the mindset of the CEO is transferred to the whole organization. That is because a fixed-mindset leader is constantly judging everyone around them, making them afraid to raise any kind of concerns or creative ideas, while a growth-minded leader encourages them to do just that. Take it from Andrew Carnegie, one of the richest people of the 19th century, who said, "I wish to have as my epitaph, here lies a man who was wise enough to bring man into his service who knew more than he." So by now I hopefully convinced you of the importance to change your own mindset, so let me give you a simple 4-step framework on how you can do it. First, you will have to recognize that all people are in fact a mix of growth and fixed mindset. I was, for example, convinced that you can grow your intelligence by reading or listening to smart people, but surely your abilities in playing basketball would be kept by your height. Well, Calvin Murphy would probably have a different take on that. As soon as you recognize that you're actually a mix of the two mindsets, start to identify areas where you have a fixed mindset and what kind of situations trigger that mindset. Then, if you want to, give the mindset a name so you can conceptualize it better. I know this step sounds a little silly, but it definitely helped me, so why not try it? Once your fixed mindset has the appropriate persona, all you need to do is to call this persona out on his or her bullshit and prove them wrong. Tell them to be a little bit patient and leave enough time to actually get in the necessary effort to find out if talent is actually the problem. And nothing is better suited to get in that effort than some solid habits, so I would highly recommend that you watch my video about atomic habits from James Clear next.